Really excited about what we have to talk about this morning. We're going to be talking about David and Goliath, which is one of my favorite Bible stories. If you're visiting, my name's David, so that kind of hopefully tracks for you. But I want us to begin, and I think this lesson will dovetail really nicely with some of the things that Barry has been talking about with discussing the gospel and the kingdom. But I want us to begin with this question. What is the biggest problem in your life right now? Maybe you've got problems at work, your boss is really difficult, or you're worried about layoffs, or you've just got a big deadline coming up. Maybe you've got relationship problems, you're worried you're going to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, or you're having a tough time in your marriage, or whatever it is. Maybe you've got financial problems, money is tight, whatever it is. Probably all of us have some problem that we could pick out and think of like, that's the biggest problem in my life. If I could solve that, everything would be a lot easier. I want you to think about what that is for you. But whatever it is, probably you have a problem that'll help you relate to the people in the story this morning, because it's a story about the Israelites when they have a really big problem, literally. It's the story of how they're going to face the Philistines and this giant Goliath. And we're going to walk through this story this morning, which is a pretty exciting story in and of itself, but it's also going to help us by the end of it understand how we as Christians should think about solving the problems that we face in our own lives. So let's start off, appreciate Cameron reading kind of the introduction to this story. The Philistines have come into the Israelites' territory, and they are there to invade and conquer the Israelites. And so all of the Israelite army, they gather together in the valley of Elah. I'll try and show you, maybe if you can kind of see this like back region here is where this is happening. And this is kind of like where the Israelites would be, and this is kind of where the Philistines would be, and you can see there's kind of this valley in between, and that's where they're divided. So everybody's gathered up here, preparing for battle. The Philistines on one side and the Israelites on the other side. And at this point in Israel's history, shocker, like things have not been going super great for them. They have had this time period of following the judges, and throughout that whole time period, the constant refrain is everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It's this constant time period of kind of following God and then kind of falling away, and they waffle back and forth until finally they say, we don't want judges anymore. We want a king. And they get this guy, Saul, who looks like he's going to be a great king, but turns out to be a pretty bad leader. And he's the guy who's in charge of Israel at this point in time when these bloodthirsty Philistines come trying to conquer Israel, which is a pretty big problem if you've got another nation that's trying to invade you and you don't have a good leader. To make matters worse, the Philistines have an ace up their sleeve in their champion, this giant Goliath. And I want us to kind of to really picture Goliath in our minds. Maybe if you were picturing like an actor who would play Goliath in a movie, you would pick a big, tall, muscle-bound guy like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody. I brought some visual aids. So this is Arnold Schwarzenegger on the left. He's old now, so he's not as big as he used to be, but he's still a big guy. The guy on the right is quite a bit bigger than Arnold Schwarzenegger ever was. That guy's name is Hafthor Bjornsson. He's a professional strongman. He's 6 feet 9 inches tall. He weighs in anywhere from 397 to 463 pounds, depending on what he's training for. He's the world record holder in the deadlift. He deadlifted over 1,100 pounds. When I imagine what it would be like to face Goliath, I imagine a guy who looks something like that, maybe even taller, like 9 feet tall. Can you imagine being an Israelite and everybody's getting ready for battle, and then amongst the Philistine ranks, a guy like that walks out ready to fight you? And Goliath walks out, and this is what Goliath says. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Any volunteers? Of course not. Like, everybody is terrified of this guy. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. You can kind of understand why the Israelites are feeling like this is a massive problem, right? Because if you imagine, like, we at Woodland Hills, let's say we were the armies of Israel, who among us would you pick to be the champion and go out and fight Goliath and actually have a shot? Like ladies, anybody want to volunteer their husbands for that job and have some confidence that they're going to be able to pull that off? We had some folks over for a fire pit a few weeks ago, and we were joking about who would your Woodland Hills zombie apocalypse survival team be? Like, if you could pick three guys to help you get through a zombie apocalypse, who would it be? And I picked John Mayberry, Philip McLean, and David Lee Buselmeyer. All strong guys, tough guys that I would not want to fight. But I would, if all three of them were fighting Goliath together, I would still pick Goliath to win, hands down, no problem, every time. Do you see the problem the Israelites are facing here? Who are they going to pick to be their champion that has any kind of a shot to actually face Goliath? That's the whole problem in this situation. Now, the Israelites are here. Goliath knows that they have no shot against him, and he's just going to kind of rub it in their face. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward and took his stand, morning and evening. 40 days, every morning and every evening, Goliath comes out and he taunts the Israelites and is mocking them and is really mocking and defying God. And yet there's nobody among the Israelites who is brave enough to take a stand against Goliath until one day a shepherd boy named David shows up at the Israelite camp. David is too young to be a warrior. He's just there to deliver some food to his older brothers who are in the Israelite army. And while he's there, he hears Goliath taunting the Israelites. And everybody hears this taunt, and they freak out like they always do and are terrified of Goliath. But David's reaction is a little bit different. He says, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David hears Goliath's taunts, and he's not afraid. He's mad about it. He says, who does this guy think that he is? And word starts to get around the camp that David isn't afraid of Goliath. And eventually it makes it all the way back to King Saul. And Saul thinks, great, there's a guy who's not afraid. That's my guy. And so Saul sends for David. And when David comes to Saul, David has an offer for Saul. He says, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Now, picture actually what's happening here, right? Like, Saul has heard there's a guy who's brave enough to fight the Philistine Goliath. He's probably expecting what? Like some big, macho, muscle-bound warrior, tall, strong, good jawline, macho facial hair, somebody who looks the part. And who walks into his tent but this scrawny teenage shepherd boy? And Saul's reaction is kind of like, this is the guy? Are you kidding me? And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. Saul says, David, you're just a kid. This guy has been killing people since before you were born. You have got no shot here. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Even though it seems like David should have no shot winning this battle, David says, I am confident that I'll be victorious because every time I've been in a situation like this in the past, God has been faithful to me and he's delivered me, and I'm confident that God will deliver me again here. And so Saul says, okay, David, you will be the champion for Israel. Now, at first, Saul tries to give David his armor, and David tries it on. It doesn't really fit. It doesn't work. So David decides he's just going to stick with what he knows, his shepherd's tools, I guess. He's got his staff, he's got his sling, and he's got 5 smooth stones in his pouch. And that's all that he takes to go out and to face Goliath alone. Now, I really want you to visualize this scene unfolding as we go through the action here. Imagine that you are an Israelite and everybody is lined up for battle. You're lined up on the front lines of the Israelite army. And on the other side of the valley, you can see all of the Philistine army. And you can see, even across the valley, you can see the massive figure of Goliath and pick him out, no problem, from amongst the Philistine ranks. And then you see this tiny little shepherd boy, David, walking alone into the valley to face Goliath. If you're an Israelite, you're a little worried about it right now? You're a little worried that the champion of Israel is this probably a teenage kid who maybe is not even 5 feet tall? You're a little worried about the outcome of this battle? Now, across the valley, Goliath sees that finally there's an opponent coming towards him, and he gets up, finally, someone to take his challenge. And as he gets closer, he starts to realize that the champion of Israel is literally just a shepherd boy. Not even wearing any armor, just an actual shepherd boy. And Goliath thinks it's a joke. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." Goliath thinks this is a joke. This is ridiculous, that the champion of Israel is just this tiny shepherd boy. And Goliath likes to talk trash, so he figures, okay, I might as well make fun of him and get a few laughs in before I rip this kid limb from limb. If Goliath likes trash talk, he's about to get more than he bargained for. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." If you're on either side of this battle, you could kind of be like, who is this kid? Where did this guy come from? And how does he have the courage to talk to Goliath like that? Where did this guy come from? And Goliath, he's had enough of the trash talk. So Goliath starts marching towards David. Imagine you're watching this, you're an Israelite, and David starts running towards Goliath. And you're thinking, this is not going to end well. But look what happens. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. What an incredible scene that David slings his sling and hits Goliath and strikes him down and pulls out his sword and cuts off his head, and maybe he raises the severed head so that everybody can see that he's been victorious. And the Israelites rally with a shout, and they chase the Philistines all the way back to Philistia, and led by David, the Israelites defeat their enemies and are victorious that day. It's an incredible story. It's riveting. It's one of the most well-known Bible stories for a reason. But is this just a cool story? Is that why this is in the Bible? And I think we know that it's not. That when we read stories like this, we're supposed to understand why God has put it there. What is the application of this story? Well, we might notice that, the Israelites are facing this pretty big problem, right? This big enemy. And it's a problem that feels like it's too great for them to deal with. And none of them really have the courage to stand up against Goliath. But then David shows up, and even though David seems like he shouldn't be able to be victorious in this situation, David trusts in God and has the courage to face Goliath and to be victorious. And we all have problems in our lives too, right? And sometimes those problems feel really big and really scary, like they're too much for us to face. What should this story teach us about dealing with these problems? We can face our giants with courage if we trust in God like David. Okay, that sounds pretty good, right? That sounds pretty punchy. If that's the application we take away from this story, we've got it all wrong. And I kind of intentionally bait and switched you there. That's how we often read this story. And I'm not denying that this is a true statement that we should have courage from trusting in God, but that's not what this story is about. Oftentimes we read the Bible just like we're looking at other kind of general wisdom literature, trying to figure out what the message is for us. And so we read the New Testament like we're reading Aristotle or Socrates, like what's the wisdom here for me? We read Old Testament stories like we're reading Aesop's fables, like what's the moral of the story? And if that's how we read the Bible, we might as well just be reading general wisdom and fables, because anybody can do that. If I was not a Christian at all, I could read this story and get a moral out of it, and it would be about how one courageous person can accomplish great things, or about how you shouldn't judge people by their appearances, or about how if you stick to your strengths, you'll come out on top, or something. All general truisms, all perfectly valid, but not what this story is about. And if you present it that way, it's kind of obvious, right? You're not supposed to take God out of the application of a Bible story, right? But we kind of just shoehorn God back in. Our natural way of reading this story is still basically one courageous person can do great things, and we just tack on, as long as they trust in God, because we're Christians, right? That's not what this story is about. And I'll tell you why we often read it that way. Who in this story do you identify with? Who do you see yourself as? Who do you resonate with? It's David, right? We all want to be David. We admire David. We admire his courage. We want to be the hero like David. We want to be like David. Doubly so if your name is actually David. That's not a joke. I remember being a kid, I was 3 years old, and I would play pretend this with my mom, and she would be Goliath, and I would be David, and she would do the am I a dog that you come to me? And I would do the speech, and it was great fun. I thought it was a blast when I was 3 years old. When I was in college, I went to a Halloween party, and I thought it would be hilarious if my costume was David, and I had these fleece blankets that were my shepherd's tunic, and I had a little fanny pack for my pouch and a toy slingshot, and people would come up to me and be like, "Who are you?" And I'd be like, "I'm David," and I thought it was hilarious. We read this story, and our natural way of reading it is to be we're David. That's who we should see ourselves as. And the whole point of this story is you're not David. Remember that this story comes on the heels of some pretty pivotal changes in Israel's history. Remember, Saul has been king for a while now, and like we said earlier, Saul is a pretty bad king. He's supposed to be a good king. He looks on the outside that he's going to be a good king, but he actually is arrogant, he's selfish, he makes bad decisions, and he consistently disobeys God. And so a couple chapters before this, in 1 Samuel 15, God finally says to Saul through the prophet Samuel, "Saul, I've had enough. You're not going to be king anymore. The kingdom's going to be taken away from you, and it's going to be given to somebody else." And in 1 Samuel 16, God sends Samuel in secret to anoint the new king. And the person Samuel anoints, the person God chooses, is David, this shepherd boy David. And it's going to be a while before David receives the kingdom, but David has been anointed. So when we read this story, we should not see in David some random foolhardy shepherd boy who's got enough courage and is good enough of a crack shot with a sling to take down a giant. we should see David acting as God's anointed one. I think Barry talked about this a couple weeks ago. That word anointed one, the Hebrew word there is Mashiach. It's from that we get the word Messiah. The Greek word for anointed one is Christos. That's where we get the word Christ. So when we say Jesus Christ, what you're literally saying is Jesus anointed one, Jesus Messiah. Does that totally reframe the way that you see this story? That this story is about David acting as God's anointed one, God's Messiah. We want to see ourselves in this story, but what we should see is Jesus in this story. Think about what is unfolding here really. The Israelites have this big problem of the Philistines, and the Philistines want to come in and conquer their land. Sometimes we kind of get detached from that, but this is real war. The fate of Israel rests on this battle. If you're an Israelite soldier, think about what the ramifications are if you lose. First of all, the Philistines are going to kill you pretty violently, which is pretty bad, but then they are going to march unopposed into your homeland. They're going to ransack your towns, they're going to rape your wives and children, they're going to murder your family, and if they don't do that, they're going to enslave your family. And if you don't win here, there's going to be nothing you can do to prevent it. The fate of Israel, the fate of the kingdom, rests on this battle, and you're facing an enemy that is too great for you. The embodiment of that is Goliath, who is the biggest, strongest, scariest warrior there is, and nobody in Israel can stand against him. What we should see in that is not just one nation fighting against another. We should see a picture of the gospel narrative. We should see in Israel God's people being opposed by the forces of evil. And that is something that Scripture says is reality. That's kind of weird to think about, but Scripture says throughout that there are real spiritual forces of evil that oppose God's people. Paul talks a lot about this in his epistles. In Colossians, he talks about the domain of darkness. In Ephesians, he talks about the prince of the power of the air who is at work in the sons of disobedience and the spiritual forces of darkness in the heavenly places. It's kind of weird to think about if you're not used to it, but the Bible says that there are real spiritual forces, Satan and his followers, who stand against mankind, and just like the Philistines, want to enslave and destroy us. What we should see in this story is not just one nation fighting against another. We should see the forces of evil coming against the people of God, and the people of God have a problem that they are not strong enough to stand against the forces of evil. Like, one of the interesting things in this story is Saul to me. Because if you expect anybody to go out and face Goliath, it would be Saul, right? But Saul doesn't do it. And I think sometimes we look at Saul just kind of as being cowardly because he is contrasted with David in this story. But I think Saul is probably making the right call not to fight Goliath because Saul knows that he's been rejected by God. So if he goes out to fight Goliath, he knows he's going out there alone, not with God on his side. And that's not a fight that he can win. The people of God are facing the forces of evil, and they can't win this fight until God's anointed one shows up. God's Messiah, David, shows up, and he is the one who marches out alone to face Goliath, to face the forces of evil. All of the fate of the kingdom rests on David's shoulders. He's taking all of the problems of Israel onto himself, and the outcome of the entire kingdom depends on what happens to David. And what happens? God's Messiah emerges victorious. This is not a story. This is a prophecy. This is a prophecy about what God would do through his ultimate Messiah, Jesus. And what we learn from the New Testament is that the prophecy has been fulfilled. Look at what the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews chapter 2. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. Hebrew writer describes us as being in exactly the same situation as the Israelites in this story. They're afraid, and they're facing slavery. Remember, that's what Goliath says he wants to do to the Israelites. And what the Hebrew writer says is, Jesus has come to defeat not one enemy, but to defeat evil itself, to defeat the devil and the power of death. Jesus has come to set his people free. This story is a prophecy, and the New Testament tells us the prophecy has been fulfilled. That when God shows his Messiah emerging victorious in this story, that prophecy has come to pass, that God's Messiah is victorious, that Jesus is victorious. Thanks be to God that this story is not about us, that we are not David, that Jesus is the true David, that Jesus is the true Messiah. When we read this story, that's what we should see. This story should point us to victory in Jesus. As we close, I want to circle back to where we started, because I know I promised you that this story would help us learn how to deal with the problems in our own lives. And I kind of bait and switched you there, right? Because the reality is this story isn't about us, it's about Jesus. And I kind of figured that out for myself when I was working on this lesson. Like, I started with an idea of something I wanted to talk about, and then I thought, David and Goliath would be really great to illustrate that, which is not how you're supposed to write a sermon. But I thought, I'm pretty sure I'm right, so I'll do it. But the more that I studied this story, the more that I thought about it, the more I realized the thing I thought I needed to say was not the message of this story. And I know this, right? Like, I know this story is really about Jesus. But so badly we want to see ourselves in David, and so badly we want this story to be about us. And the other mistake we make is we want to see our problems in Goliath, right? Like, we want this story to be about how God will help us to deal with the problems that we think are important in our life. And if I trust in God, he'll help me beat the things that I don't like in my life. A lot of the times, the problems that we have in our life are self-inflicted to a degree. And I want to be careful about how I'm saying this, so don't take me as meaning more than what I'm saying. But sometimes we're going through real, legitimate, severe external trials. We've been reading about that in Job, right? And when we're in those situations, our gut reaction is often, I want to get this to stop. I want to fix this. I want this trial to be over as soon as possible. Other times, the problems that we're dealing with are just our problems. That it's, I don't have the thing that I want, or maybe I'm in a situation that I don't like, or worst of all, I have chosen sin and now I have to deal with the consequences. And what I think we should notice in this story is that David views this whole scenario very differently than all of the other Israelites. All the other Israelites see this problem of Goliath and the Philistines, and what they see is, these guys want to come and kill us. Legitimate big problem, right? But David shows up, and you remember what he says? David says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David is not concerned about the problems of Israel. What David sees is that the Philistines have taken a stand against God, and he's not going to let that fly. And I think a lot of the times we approach problems in our lives like that. We have these problems in our lives just like the Israelites, and we're worried about how they're going to impact us, and we want the story to be that God is going to help us defeat the things that we think are big problems because we don't have what we want. And our natural reaction is, okay, God, tell me how I can fix this, tell me how I can get out of this situation, tell me what I need to do in my life to make my life better, tell me how I can be the hero of my own story. And the message of this story is, you're not the hero of your own story. Jesus is the hero of your story. And the mistake that we often make is we want to be the heroes of our own story, and we make pretty bad heroes because we mess up a lot, we make mistakes, we're not perfect people. We can't be our own messiahs. And yet we want to be like David. If you want to be like David, then there is one way that we can do that. It seems like David is aware that even he is not the real hero of the story, right? Like, it seems like David is aware, my job is not to be victorious for my own glory in this situation. When David marches out against Goliath and he gives this incredible speech, he doesn't say, I'm going to kill you because I'm so awesome. He says, I'm going to defeat you, Goliath, to show that God is the true God and to prove to all of Israel that that's who they should trust and to show that God is the one giving victory here, not us. David marches out to face Goliath, and he even seems to recognize this meta-narrative that he's not the real Messiah, that he is just an image who is meant to point to Jesus as the true Messiah. Even David is not the hero of his own story, God is. And I think that should change us. Like, understanding that God is the real hero should change the way that we live our lives and address our problems. Because now all of a sudden, it's not my job to try and fix things or solve my problems. If I'm going through a real serious trial and severe trial, even though my gut reaction is how do I get out of this as fast as possible, that's me trying to be the hero of my own story, and that's not my job. My job is to say, how can I glorify God in this situation? If I'm chasing after things that are problems that's really like, I don't have what I want this story to be about how is God going to change me to get the things that I want, when in reality what I should be asking is, how do I change the things that I want to match what God wants? How do I stop pursuing my own problems and start pursuing what matters to God? How can I be changed to be more like God? How can I stop trying to be the hero of my own story and start trying to point to the real hero of the story? If you want to be like David, that's what we need to do. To let go of this narrative that the Bible narrative is all about us, that it's all about God giving us what we want, and instead recognize that our job is not to be the heroes, but that our job is to point to Jesus as the true hero in our lives, because he's a far better hero than we are ever going to be. Thank you for your attention this morning. If there's any spiritual needs we can help anybody with, we can help anybody to draw closer to Jesus in whatever point you're at in your spiritual walk. We want to help you with that. We invite you to make that known. Talk to us after or come down in the front. Let's be standing and singing.